Zipper rolls out to the right, pitches off to Taylor, and Taylor's to the 20, down to the 15, down to the 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Billy Taylor scored a touchdown from 21 yards out. The crowd goes berserk. It was November 22nd, 1969. That they came to Barry, Michigan, all dressed in maize and blue. The words were said, the prayers were read, and everybody cried. But when they closed the coffin, there was someone else inside. Oh, they came to Barry, Michigan, but Michigan wasn't dead. And when the game was over, it was someone else instead. 11 Michigan Wolverines put on the gloves of gray, and as the organ played the victors, they laid Woody Hayes away. Under center is Wangler at the 45. He goes back. He's looking for a receiver. He throws downfield to Carter. Who's got it better than us? Nobody!
Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue, and welcome to our Michigan State Visitors edition of the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. With us today to discuss Saturday's game from the Spartan perspective is Graham Couch from the Lansing State Journal. Before he joins us, a few of my thoughts to get us started. The bye week, or improvement week as Jim likes to call it, is over. Now it's time to focus on Michigan State. At his presser Monday, Jim said nothing has ever changed since he's been around this game. It was a red-letter game when he played, and it is today, and always will be. Last season was a joyride for we Michigan fans, and other than the Georgia loss in the playoffs, the game that sticks in everyone's craw was that loss to the Spartans in East Lansing. We can argue about the suspect video reviews, the non-calls, etc., etc. We still lost. This year's Spartan team is not that team, not remotely close. Kenneth Walker is in the NFL and playing well, at least thus far. This team bears no resemblance to last year's team, and there's no reason to believe they're going to. They've had injuries on both sides of the ball that have led to big struggles. They lack depth in many position groups and just have not found any kind of rhythm so far. Our job is to make sure they don't find any this Saturday. I don't even care that they aren't a good football team right now. This game is their Super Bowl, always has been, always will be. It's what makes this game dangerous. We need to get on them early and suck the life right out of them. As bad as they are, we cannot let these guys hang around in this game. Too many strange things can happen in a rivalry game, and believe you me, we've seen them through the years. My guest today says he doesn't see a path to victory for Michigan State on Saturday. He thinks Michigan will come out and try to run the ball down their throats, and he thinks we have the personnel to do just that. Still, as he said, funny things happen in this game. Joining us next is Graham Couch from the Lansing State Journal. So don't go away. Here with us on our Visitors Edition today as we get ready for the big Saturday night game with Michigan State is Graham Couch from the Lansing State Journal. Once again, Graham, it's great to have you with us.
That's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, Graham, the Spartans went into the bye week on a positive note, beating Wisconsin in double overtime. And really for the first time this season against a Power 5 team, they had balance on offense, 34 runs, 30 passes, I think it was. Overall, step in the right direction. Pretty solid day for the Spartan offense, wasn't it?
It was a needed day for them. Definitely. I mean, anything there was only really one direction to go, I guess, the way things have been going. And so, they look like a competent football team. And I think that's something they needed. They needed to have a day where they had some things go their way on defense, where they got off the field, created some turnovers, that sort of thing. And offensively, I've always thought that they had some weapons on the outside that could be a problem for teams. And that finally showed up, and it helped that Jaden Reed was healthy. And, Wisconsin's defense isn't what it's been certain years, but no doubt a game that was needed for them.
Well, I've been able to see bits and pieces of the Spartans so far this year, but for our Michigan listeners who haven't seen much of them, we know that they've struggled for consistency on offense. There are a lot of reasons for that. But from your perspective, what are the major factors that have contributed to all of these struggles?
Well, one of them is the absence of Kenneth Walker. And if you watch what Kenneth Walker is doing on Sundays right now, it's like, okay, that makes some sense. And he was a bigger part of them last year than I think. At the time I thought he was the difference between a 11-2 season, 10-2, which they had, or 6-6, 5-7. I think at the time, in real time, there was an understanding that he was that big a difference. However, when you look at it this year now, you look at Walker, the absence of a guy who's just that good, really doesn't matter who you're playing, and then an offensive line that was deeper and a little more seasoned last year, just a little bit better. That combination has really been everything. And I don't think, defensively they got hit with some injuries early on that were, I thought they might have a little more depth this year and be able to withstand, but they didn't, and they were the wrong injuries at the wrong spots. They lost their all Big Ten defensive tackle, Jacob Slade, for a number of weeks. Their veteran safety, Xavier Henderson. And then they were playing a guy who's probably been their best player, and Jacoby Winmond, a transfer from UNLV, out of position at defensive end, which worked great against Akron and Western Michigan, but he'd been sort of taken out of games by people, and they finally moved him back to linebacker. And so in 1 week against Wisconsin, you had Slade back at defensive tackle for the first time, Henderson back at safety for the first time, and Winmond at linebacker, who had a great game. And so that looked like a much more capable and competent defense. Now, that was against Graham Mertz in Wisconsin. And I think they're okay, but a very different animal than what they're about to face against Michigan.
Let's talk about Peyton Thorne for just a minute or so, Graham. Last year he was very impressive to me. He had a big year. Very smart quarterback. I like watching how he reads that offense, or reads the defense, I should say. But, he's had an up and down season so far, and he's been getting a lot of heat every time I read something. A lot of Spartan fans getting on Peyton. But he's been, to be fair to him, he has been running for his life a lot this year, hasn't he?
Yeah, it's tough because I do think he has not taken that next step, at least yet, to show that he can sort of carry a team when it needs a guy. There was some sort of thought and I think hope among MSU fans that now he would become a star, just because he was a capable veteran quarterback, and that hasn't happened. Now, to be fair to him, it is very hard to produce good offense when you don't have a running game or an offensive line that can protect you. It just is. And then your top receiver is out or limited a lot of the first half of the season, and that's been a real issue for them. So there are some things where I think, like against Akron and Western Michigan, he was not all that accurate, and he struggled a little bit, and so that sticks with people as well. And look, he's a second-year starting quarterback in major college football, so some criticism is certainly warranted. I do think that the situation around him has been very difficult, and I think last week you saw some of the reason you stick with a guy like that, just the ability to, that connection with Jaden Reed and the ability to get them into a different play late and sort of the gumption that he has. But there will be some pressure on him throughout the rest of this year because they like the two quarterbacks beneath him. One is a true freshman, but the other, redshirt sophomore, who every time he's come into the game, albeit in garbage time, mostly is looked pretty good and produced.
Well, have we reached a point in the season with Spartan offense where, you say it is what it is, or do you think they can be better in the second half of the season?
Yeah, no, I think they can be better because with Reed, who they were against Wisconsin was very different than who they were against Minnesota. Minnesota is the game that's really troubling, I think, for people out there. But a lot of that has to do with Jaden Reed and his health and having a guy. He's I don't know what type of NFL player he'll be, but he'll be an NFL player, and he's certainly a college star. And he comes with swagger and speed, and just some natural playmaking ability, makes great catches in traffic and 50-50 ball sort of things. And that not having that guy, the trickle down to the rest of the receivers and not having him at 100% was, I think, really problematic. So I think there is that, that he's back. That changes who they are. They have some potential matchup advantages there on the outside. The problem is I don't know how much better this line can get. Maybe it's got to find something it can hang its hat on. It played okay against Wisconsin, but Michigan and Illinois will be really good tests. I don't think they're going to win a lot of pushing people around up front, but if they can protect well, they can block on the edges or find something they do well to have a bit of a running game, then they've got a chance to improve. But otherwise, I mean, you're so limited when you can't run the football.
Well, we all know over on the defensive side, a lot of injuries early in the season, but some of those guys are coming back. Jacob Slade and safety Xavier Henderson played against Wisconsin. And I did get to see that game, and their impact on the defense was noticeable, wasn't it, Graham?
Yeah, and you saw it with other guys. Like Slade up front, you see it with Simeon Barrow and how he's now freed up, and he had a great game with playing next to Slade. So, yeah, it makes a huge difference. If those guys have been healthy all year, and the Darius Snow injuries hurt them a lot too, but if those guys who have come back have been healthy all year and in those positions, and they've been playing a 4-3 defense, which I think is probably the best fit for this group, they certainly, I don't think, would have gone 0-3 against Washington, Minnesota, and Maryland. I don't know what game they would have won, where the circumstances would have been different, but it would have been a different stretch during there. They probably win one of those games at least. And so that is greatly impacted the season. There's no question about it. And I don't think any of us quite realized when those guys went down the degree to which they didn't have guys who were ready to play at that level behind them.
Well, and you also mentioned earlier Jacoby Windman, who was playing out of position until the Wisconsin game. He's back at linebacker, and he really looks good there, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. He looks more natural there. He just can affect the game more. And he's a good athlete. He's a vocal guy. He's a guy who has a nose for the ball in terms of getting it out, forcing fumbles. It's harder to take a linebacker out of a game than a defensive end. And he's still rushing on third downs. They're using him really in a linebacker setting like that on first and second, but in passing downs and third downs, they're trying to get him, downhill after the quarterback. But and that worked a little bit last week with a little more pass rush. That's another part of this is their defense has been so, the whole thing has been a sort of a complete failure of complementary football. Offense, defense across the board. Can't do this, can't do that. This affects that. And defensively, their inability to get after the quarterback through that 4-game losing streak where they had 2 sacks and one of them was pretty fluky. That has created a problem on the back end where they're not that good in the back end, but nobody's supposed to be back there covering for 3-4 seconds. So that's created issues as well.
Well, one game doesn't mean you've turned a corner, but there have been so many injuries on that defensive side of the ball this year. Are we seeing enough, maybe starting with that Wisconsin win, that Coach Hazelton and the defense are starting to figure some things out?
The fact they made some changes, the fact that they went to a 4-3, and the fact that they were willing to move Windman on the linebacker, playing a couple of younger guys too. I think there were some things that they did that you have to think, though, that's a good sign for them, that they're willing to make those changes. Some of them could have they made a little earlier, like going to a 4-3 maybe, but you can also argue that having Henderson back there allows them to be, to switch and go to that defense a little easier. But the real question becomes, what does it mean when you're playing Michigan, and a team that's determined to, put one on you and has maybe the goods to do it, especially up front. And so, the Wisconsin game to me was an absolutely important game for them because it rescued a season from just going down a hole in the misery that you weren't coming out of. But I still don't know whether they have enough in them to be competitive in a game like this.
Well, when we look at this Saturday's matchup with Michigan State, the Michigan defense has been very good this year, surprised a lot of Michigan fans. There's some people out there, some critics that say the defense really hasn't been tested yet. What does this Spartan offense need to do if they want to have success against Michigan?
Yeah, I think they need to force some balance, and that's easier said than done. They've got to create some respect for the idea that they're going to run the football, and I think they'll try to do that, even if it's not working, because their passing game, when it's working, their weapons at receiver, at tight end, are legitimate. Like, that's the strength to me of the team in a lot of ways, and They've got a veteran quarterback, and so those guys need to have the game of their lives, and they need to not turn the ball over, and they need to get the ball to their playmakers. And they've got some guys who can do that, but it's hard to do that if you know a team can't run against you and they sort of abandon it. And so I think that sort of forcing balance, I don't think it's as much about the yards as it's the number of carries. Slow the game down. Although Michigan, I don't think is going to beat them through an aerial assault this week. I think Michigan will do some of that because Michigan State's vulnerable there. But Michigan wants to do what Michigan's been doing, which is use that incredible offensive line and Blake Corum, and just it's a good backfield and win in the trenches, which I think they're likely to do. But for Michigan State to win, it's no turnovers. It's getting their playmakers the ball. It's having something go well early that puts some doubt in Michigan's mind that they're going to run away with this. That's probably it.
Well, that Michigan offense, like last year, loves to pound the running game. That's becoming more and more obvious each and every week, even though a lot of Michigan fans want to see JJ open it up a bit. That doesn't seem to be happening. I expect Michigan to come out and run, which was really at the strength of that Spartan defense. And how do you think they can hold up against that Michigan front line?
That's a great question. I don't know. And, it has been the strength. There have been years where that has been something they could really hang their hat on. I think they're okay with Slade playing now. I think it's not a bad group. I think Michigan's got a special group, though, up front. It's a little different than even most good offensive lines. And there have been years where I would have said, well, this is a matchup that Michigan State that plays into Michigan State's favor just because of styles, right? And this is what you're not going to run the ball against MSU. And there were years even when Michigan State was pretty average late in the D'Antonio era where you could say that about the defense. I don't know that that's there now, though. I think Michigan will have its way up there. I've been wrong on this matchup before. I'll just give you a sense. I've picked Michigan to win this game 7 straight years now going into this year, and I've been wrong on 4 of them. So I clearly haven't read it correctly. There have been times where I thought Michigan was the better team going in, or the situation favored Michigan, and then it played out differently. So, things can happen. It's a rivalry that people always say, well, you throw out the records. It's not just that. There's dynamics in it that have made it different over time. I do think, though, one thing that is in Michigan's favor now that has been in MSU's favor for a lot of years is I think you are what you emphasize to some degree. And Michigan State has emphasized this game forever, but D'Antonio really did it. I mean, and Tucker's done a good job of it too, but they've really honed in on this was an important thing for them to get flipped. I think when you listen to the Michigan folks now this year, they talk about the 4 practices all on MSU. I think this is an important game for them. I think this is a game where you'll have the focus of 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds all with one common goal, understanding how important this is.
Well, and for Michigan fans who feel very confident, you touched on that a moment ago. I remind them, the Spartans have won 10 of the last 15 games in this series, and if you look back at the odds and the experts during those 15 years, Michigan was favored to win a lot of those games. So it's been a good run over the last 15 years for the Spartans in this series, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I made write on this week because I had a conversation with Tom Izzo a number of years ago because he had sort of been through on the basketball side, and I asked him what it takes to sort of really flip a rivalry in terms of the mindset of both fan bases and how things are perceived. And he said, well, in basketball, it took us about 10 years. And I said, okay. And that was when Michigan going down as they were on the rise, and it certainly takes favorable dynamics sometimes. And I said, what do you think in football? He said, probably 15. And this is year 15 since after the Mike Hart incident, since D'Antonio's pride before the fall comment. So it'll be 10. Michigan State's 10-4, and so I do think some dynamics have changed in the rivalry. I do think there is you just can't go that many years with it winning being won at least. The rivalry being at least 50-50, and for a while Michigan State was really in charge of it and have so many different types of years where like Michigan State won emphatically, where they won narrowly, where there are all sorts of things that have happened. But I think this is a different rivalry than it was 15 years ago. But I also think that right now works against Michigan State in the sense that you've got your opponent's attention, and I think your opponent is considerably better team. And a lot of these guys who are on that Michigan roster have been through the last couple of years, and they will want to make a point.
Well, this Saturday night, as we know, big national TV game. I'm not sure if either athletic department is thrilled that it's a Saturday night game, but it is. And in the Saturday night games played between Michigan and Michigan State, we've seen some crazy weather conditions.
We've seen some absolutely bizarre games. It seems to bring out the best in both teams, doesn't it?
Well, and this is really only the second. I mean, they played in 2017. What's sort of interesting is that was a weird weather game. But so many games have been at 3:30 over the years where after daylight savings, it gets dark. And so we sort of, in our memories of these games, picture them as night games. You know? So it's not really that big a difference. But yeah, no, I do think it's, hey, it's Halloween weekend, 7:30 p.m. I'm sure the Ann Arbor police were absolutely thrilled by the game time, but it is what it is. It should be, it's a fun rivalry, especially on game day. It's usually there's something that's a little unexpected, and as always, I'm looking forward to it.
Well, final question before we let you get away, Graham. When we get to this game every year, it doesn't matter where it falls on the schedule. I came of age in the '60s watching this game. Grew up in farm country down in Monroe County. Just about everyone I knew was a Spartan growing up. If you're a farmer in Michigan, you're a Spartan fan for the most part. When you get to this game, I like to ask people, what is one of your favorite memories of this game? What game stands out to you? The triple overtime game 18 years ago, which was on October 30th of 2004, is a game that just, in my memory, was an incredible environment, great game, crazy game. But do you have one when you sit back and look at this series and say, yeah, that was a classic?
Yeah, there have been a number. One of the early, growing up, I remember the game in '95 with, Tony Banks and Igea Carter in the final seconds, and that win at Spartan Stadium. That certainly stands out. I was at that game as a kid. I think in all the years I've covered this game, everybody remembers trouble with the snap, but I remember different games for different reasons. And the 2012 game was not a classic. I think the final was like 12-10, whatever it was. But I remember the exhale in that crowd at Michigan Stadium when Michigan won. And that was a really different emotion that I had ever heard. Like, it felt like there was a relief. I had never seen that dynamic in Michigan beating Michigan State. And then you think about that in 2013, just how dominant that Michigan State defense was, to see that dynamic. And there have been, there have been so many different. I used to enjoy listening to Antonio. Was never, I wouldn't call him the greatest personality ever to cover.
Yeah.
But it came out in this week. Like, he was very quick with his quips. He was entertaining, and I always enjoyed covering him during this week. But there have been a number of games. Last year's game was as fascinating as one I can remember, and obviously trouble with the snap certainly gave me a heart attack on deadline, because I was, everybody thinks that was so exciting to cover, and it was, except at the moment I did not like it at all, because what I was writing for the instant column that I had to turn in was a very different story, and so I was not thrilled. So there are lots of memories, some of them selfish because your own coverage, and that's the thing about in this business. People always say, "How do you know you're not a fan of things?" You go, "Well, I'll tell you." Because you're rooting for the result based entirely on your own self-interest, your own deadline, the own quality of your column. And I've had a few of those in my day.
Well, here we go again Saturday night. It should be a great environment. Again, the weather, if the forecast holds up, and we all know how that can change, it should be a dry game, which will be nice. So I think everyone in the state of Michigan will be tuned in or in the stadium. Should be fun. Here with us on the visitors edition of the show this week has been Graham Couch from the Lansing State Journal. Graham, always great to have you with us each year during the game week, and we appreciate you taking the time and look forward to another visit.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
On Quick Hits today, at Jim's presser on Monday, he said Eric All had back surgery last week and he is done for the year, as we expected he would be. He was asked how close Cade was to coming back, and he had no news, no other injury updates to speak of either. On Thursday's Game Day show, we'll hear from John Borton, the longtime editor of our Michigan Bible, the Wolverine magazine, so make sure you join us for that. That will do it for another visitors edition of the show. Thanks again to Graham Couch from the Lansing State Journal for being our guest.
Don't forget to tell your family and friends about the show, and join us again on Thursday for our Michigan Game Day show with John Borton. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go Blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!